Hello there and welcome to this vlog of September 2023, and today's video is going to be on how to properly utilise psychology on the BattleTech tabletop. This came about as a discussion point for me because of a series of tweets that I was discussing with Lucen Dacia on Twitter. Lucen, as I will refer to him from here on after, has a very interesting Twitter account where he will almost act as a contrarian against the zeitgeist of the bad mechs. This predominantly comes about, and I'm sure you know this if you're kind of embedded in the BattleTech community, from the Sana series of articles on bad mechs, which I love. I think it's fantastic. It's well researched, it's well done, but it's now almost infamous, and it actually offends quite a few people because they choose mechs that, I mean, I don't care. I think it's really interesting. They also get Eldonius Rex to do all the artwork, and this is one of Eldonius's designs here. So as far as I'm concerned, Eldonius can do what the hell he wants. But they use his artwork, and then I don't know if he actually writes the articles or if someone else in the editorial writes it, but effectively it's a very, very contentious article, but very thought-provoking. It kind of gives you the history of a mech, and then it tells you about like all its weaknesses. Sometimes, I mean, I agree with maybe 60% of them, maybe 40%. I will not agree with it, but I think it's well written and it's well researched, and it's just good to see people doing things like that. Recently, though, I think again, if you get offended about BattleTech, then in terms of like the tabletop or whatever, then you've got your priorities all skewered, really. But they did one on the Os Scout recently, and it's the one where I've been like, why would you like punch down on the Os Scout when it's literally just a little scouty mech? It's meant for one function, scouting. Within the wider confines of scouting, you can say that it can do spotting, it can do recon. Some variants of the Os Scout as well have like technology on there, like the Beagle probe, so you can use it for like missions and scanning mechs and capturing objectives and all that stuff. It's fast. It's got one M laser. It's not very good. It's an Os Scout. It's cheap. So yeah, I've used the Os Scout plenty of times. It's done a job for me. It usually gets a decent like level of survivability though, because people just tend to ignore it unless it's kind of just like sat on an objective. It kind of needs to be running around obviously to have the survivability, but you can use it quite effectively for like indirect fire attacks. You can use it for artillery spotting, anything like that. And the article was very much like, oh yeah, the Os Scout is just not very good, is it? And it's like, well, yeah, it's an Os Scout. I mean, what? I don't know how. Maybe it might just be that they're running out of mechs to discuss now, but they've done ones in the past where you could generally point to it and say, yes, this mech is just not good. Like on tabletop, it just will not do what it's supposed to do, or you have trouble with it, or it's just got an issue. Might be like low armor, might not deliver any damage. I suppose one of the best examples in BattleTech is the Cicada. The Cicada is a pretty terrible mech, really. I mean, like the original variant is like an M laser, 2 machine guns. It's 40 tons as well. It's unarmored, but it's just incredibly fast, and it uses all its weight space for speed. And that's usually where people punch down on mechs, is when they are so quick that they just sacrifice everything else. In certain mechs, like that, the core variant of the Cicada, there is a variant of the Cicada that runs with a 1 PPC, which is obviously significantly more threatening. But generally speaking, like, you can't, I mean, beyond the wider context of the game, like objective capture, the Cicada is not going to be able to do that much for you. It doesn't deal any damage, really. It's not very survivable. I mean, there's always an argument with any mech. You can just run up to things and kick it, or kick your opposition. That's always a good move, but is that worth the battle value cost? Would you rather put that battle value into something that's going to win you the game, as opposed to harassing the enemy? again, I would always opt on the side of there is no real thing or such thing as a bad mech if you play it correctly and if you're using it as part of the wider doctrine of the Force. So Cicada, although individually a terrible mech, within the right Force, it can be quite an effective tool. And that's you should always look at it as it's basically a toolbox, right? All these options in BattleTech, all the variants, all the weaponry, everything else, they are just tools for you to use to dig yourself out of a bad situation. Whether you're playing like a standalone game or campaign operations, I mean, when you're talking about campaign operations, you need to think about, how easy is this mech to fix? There's barely anything on the Cicada, so it's quite easy to fix. If you bring a mech that's got loads of advanced lost tech on there, do you even have any of that to, retrofit your mech with when it gets destroyed? So this is big picture stuff going on here. The one thing that I saw though in the series of articles where I was like, that's just intrinsically wrong, is when they really, really kind of targeted the assassin. No pun intended. The assassin is one of those mechs that is, I mean, I like the assassin. I love how it looks. If you're playing End of the Succession Wars, I don't think you'll find any mech that's got such a great jump on it like the assassin. It's quick and it's jump capable. It's got really, really, really bad weaponry though. So, like, it's just for a 40-ton mech, and all the none of the weapons match. But the assassin can do this like one-trick pony thing, which can be devastating for a 40-ton mech with those jump jets. If you can get your opposition to go to basically stand alongside a one level up hex point or terrain point, however you're playing, if you can jump on that and then kick your opponent in the head, you attack then, or you hit on the punch table, and you've got a 1 in 6 chance of doing a kick to the head of a mech, which is devastating, right? So the assassin, for that alone in the Succession War era, it really gives you a positional advantage, because if your opponent knows that that one trick exists, it really limits where they can put things. Like they can never put a unit by the side of a hill if your assassin is within jump range, and your assassin will probably be in jump range because it can jump very, very far. So just, like saying it's a bad mech, prima facie, just looking at the record sheet and saying, yes, it's bad, is correct. If you're playing a Forster where you are looking for positional advantage because maybe your opponent outgun you, or you've got limited battle value, or you're in a you need to kind of capture things on a clock or things of that nature, the assassin can be incredibly useful. It's not like the Osk Scout situation where the Osk Scout could be put in any force and just kind of used for cheap battle value, doing some tagging or some like basic recon, or maybe trying to get like objectives or things like that. The assassin can be used in like a multifaceted role. Like I said, it's a solid mech if you know how to use it. Now, Lucian did a very good, does a good series of like tweets. It's Lucian. Sorry. On when Sana released one of these articles, he will then go and almost like just deconstruct it and say, like what I've just done on the assassin, like, yeah, you can point at how bad it is all day, but I can make this work, right? So it's good. It's fun to do that. It's like a contrarian take of the zeitgeist, and usually the zeitgeist within the community is just people parroting what players say, right? Or good players. So a good player will look at an assassin because of the way they play. Maybe it doesn't suit them and say, it's a terrible mech, it's garbage. That then, goes throughout the community, and all of a sudden the assassin is like the worst mech. Never bring it. It's terrible. It's a waste of money. That's not true. So Lucian really does try to to counter that. And we got in a discussion about the dragon, actually. And the discussion we had was, Lucian was saying the dragon is actually a completely decent mech. It's solid on tabletop. It's got a terrible reputation, though. People think it's absolute garbage. And I kind of, the series of tweets we were sending, I said something along the lines of, I always get success with the dragon. I don't know what it is. It's just, I don't know if it's just like a lucky mech for me, or it just suits my style of play. But this is a quote from what I tweeted. Always seems to get that crucial positional or flank when I need it most. And that's how I always view the dragon. And I always have room for a dragon in my forces. It's, if you're talking about like the original dragon, it's got very mismatched like weaponry. So it's got like an AC5, it's got one front facing M laser and an LRM10. It's also a big heavy mech. You know, it's a 60 tonner that can run. So you want to get it up close to your opposition to really get into them, and you can't really do that because its weaponry wants to skirmish. So it's an odd machine. But, and this plays into the topic that I wanted to discuss today, the psychology of the dragon can be massively used to your advantage. Because the zeitgeist in the community is the dragon is terrible, if you play a dragon and you play it as a tank, and one way you can semi-do that is straight away is just to take the Grand Dragon as opposed to the regular dragon. It's a mech that I think comes out in like 3024, so chances are you've got access to it. Really quite a cheap machine, no airs and graces. It swaps out the AC5 for a PPC. That's why it's basically a better mech. There's no, you know, the only ammo on there then is the LRM10 ammo. It's just, yeah, it's just a much better machine. So for the purposes of this, we'll talk about the Grand Dragon, because the Grand Dragon is just another variant of the dragon, and it's you know, it is almost the stock variant, because the original dragon, the AC5 dragon, is just you know, it's something that the Karita or the Draconis Combine just threw into the fray, and, you know, just won battles with numbers because they had so many dragons, because they're so easy to make. I mean, you can just see how the dragon looks. It's just like sheet metal welded together. There's nothing fancy about it. It's legs, head, and arms and guns. That's it. Whereas, you know, a lot of mechs have got those, like, you know, they make them look like erudite and, you know, quite sexy. Dragon, no, it's just a big stompy robot that runs, and it's quick as well. It's got a very good engine in there. You know, it's a 5.8. You know, walks 5, runs 8, so it can really kind of get in quite quickly. Lucen then made a very, very salient point, and I'll just read this out word for word. This is on the back of my comment about the dragon. The biggest weapon in the world is worth nothing if you can't get it into position to shoot at the target. Conversely, a weaker gun with a clean shot at the target's back can be a great thing to have. I couldn't agree with that anymore, and that's what got me thinking about doing this particular vlog, was on the psychology really of that tweet, and how, I mean, let's break it down. So the first point of that is, you know, the biggest weapon in the world is worth nothing if you can't get it into position. That's self-explanatory. That means what that's talking about there is how important positional play is in BattleTech. So it's like the Hunchback. The stock variant of the Hunchback for me is not a good mech because it's too slow to get positionals with its AC20. It's a scary mech. You know, you can use it for positional domination. So if you're running a Hunchback up a certain like quadrant of the battlefield, ain't no one going to get close to it. So it's not a useless mech by any stretch of the imagination, but don't be going into it thinking that you will be causing mass levels of destruction with that AC20, because probably ain't going to happen if you're playing a decent player. So I always opt for the Hunchback with the AC10. I think it's a far superior mech. It's got more range on there. And I think I did a video on this once. It's basically like a very, very good Centurion. It's got like better armor than the Centurion. It's got almost identical loadout, just doesn't have the LRMs on there. But it's a really nice tank, is the AC Hunchback. The Dragon, though, because it's got these mismatched weapons, but as Lucen makes the good point there, if you can't get your big gun into the fray, completely worthless. You will always get your gun into the fray with a dragon because it runs 8 for a 60-ton mech, and it, you know, just again, we'll talk about the Grand Dragon variant. That's a PPC and an LRM10 and medium lasers. So that thing is, you know, pretty dangerous. Even, you know, acting as a skirmish mech. The psychology of this, though, and this kind of buys into the second part of the tweet, but also something I'm going to add to it. the rear attack element of a dragon is a real thing. You know, if you're a 60-ton mech and, you know, you can potentially get a positional on an assault quite easily, a PPC and an LRM-10 to the back of any mech, whether it's assault or light, and you know, assaults obviously don't get the same kind of target modifiers that a light will get because they are slower. So you can do pretty decent damage with that, and it's that psychological aspect. It's going to keep your enemy on their toes. I will develop this tweet though, and what I want to talk about here is using psychology. That's psychology in terms of like the core mechanics of the game. What I want to talk about now though is kind of the wider human psychology of this, and how people will look at a dragon on tabletop and think, I read once that this was not a good mech, so I'm just going to ignore it. Well, they are ignoring the entire premise that that mech, although its weapons are mismatched all over the place, it's slightly under armoured on certain areas. For a 60-ton mech, it looks pretty terrible on paper. But any mech that can get within quite easily a medium shot with a PPC and an LRM-10, you need to be thinking about that mech, especially if you're playing in like the Succession War era. And because people just write these mechs off, they write the Assassin off, they write the Dragon off, they write the Crusader off, you can absolutely use it to their advantage. Yes, they are poor mechs in a vacuum. You know, looked at, you go onto Flex or have the record sheet and just look at what it is. You're like, this doesn't work. If you use that though, if you purposefully are bringing one of those mechs in, knowing that it will be completely ignored or underestimated, or better still, you might have a one-trick pony on that particular mech that your opponent really has to pay mind to, or they are going to be in a lot of trouble. You can use that to your advantage all the time. And what I'd advise is, I'll give you like loose term here, some homework. The next time you play BattleTech, go onto the Sana list. You know, basically they do this. They do the kind of news roundup every month, and in that they will have the bad mech article. Just go and pick one from like the last year. Pick one of those mechs. Try to get it to work in your force. I'll tell you why this is good as well, because a lot of these mechs, not the Dragon, but a lot of the other mechs that I've talked about here, like the Assassin, the Crusader, they will all be out as new plastics in the next Kickstarter. So if you have gone in for the Kickstarter, the chances are you're going to have these mechs. So you're going to have to learn how they work. So think about it now. Think about that force. Think about, you know, like have a look at it on paper and think, if I put this with a tank and a skirmisher, it works because I can get a positional, or this, you know, if I'm playing a game against someone in their operations, I can have this mech here that's going to be completely ignored, actually skirmishing and doing objective capture, whereas my opponent might only have the skirmishing ability, but he doesn't have the mech with the speed to do the objective capture. And that's thing to think about. That psychology, keeping up with the zeitgeist, is actually more important than having the kind of, you know, the Twitter arguments with people about what mechs are good and what are not good or whatever, which is all noise. You can use that absolutely to your advantage if you like to play tabletop, just by experimenting with these mechs that are so-called not very good and seeing that most of them have strengths in their own right. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say today. It's quite a short one. I'll probably get back to the campaign ops episode next week. But that came up again, thanks to Lucian for kind of, you know, giving me that idea, because I think it's a really quite an interesting topic, something that is worthy of discussion and thought anyway, for sure. Especially, you know, I'm going to do this like series on campaign operations, and these mechs, you know, the mechs that are bad are cheap usually, and they are easy to kind of retrofit, and you find their, you know, components everywhere throughout the galaxy. So within the wider context, they can be very, very effective. Anyway, I'll leave that here, and I'll thank you very much for watching, and I'll hopefully catch you again next time.